In tonight's episode of 911 Lodestar, Wyatt stopped by the house to introduce his new girlfriend to his dad and stepmom. He also wanted to let them know that he was dropping out of college because he wanted to be a firefighter like his dad. Wyatt kind of needs the money right now because his girlfriend was pregnant, and they were keeping it. Like his dad, Wyatt kinda needs the money right now. His girlfriend was pregnant and they were keeping it. They knew their finances couldn't stretch for a baby and both of them were going to school, and so they decided only one of them would continue college, and that would be Leanne. Wyatt actually came to the house because he had to make up for missing the AFD application deadline. He was hoping that his father could speak well of him to the fire chief so that he could begin receiving a salary sooner. But Judd needed some time to comprehend things because he was so stunned about being a grandfather. When Judd came back to work for the following shift, he was still in shock. He had been holding off on telling his pals about his new grandchild just yet, so he was remaining silent. The same was being attempted by Mateo in his own circumstance. There is a cousin of Mateo's who resembles him identically, because Mateo is the good guy and his cousin Marvin was the bad one. That is the only way to distinguish between the two. Marvin enjoys taking people for joy rides in other people's cars that he has borrowed. He recently did that with a Ferrari, because he was a repeat offender and collided with a minivan. His bail was raised. This time they requested $25,000 in total. When Marvin contacted Mateo, he anticipated that Mateo would pay as usual. Mateo also lacked the necessary funds. Sure, Mateo had some savings. He lacked $25,000. He didn't want to notify his buddies about the problem because he needed to borrow money to get that money. He only lacked the funds to cover the bail himself. He ultimately made the decision to tell someone, and that someone was Owen. Owen was asked for the money by Mateo. He was questioned by Owen about his status. He wanted to assist Mateo because he was aware that Mateo rarely spent $25, much less needed it. Simply put, he wasn't going to let him or his cousin take advantage of him without speaking up. All about Marvin was disclosed to Owen by Mateo. He related how, upon arriving in the nation, he had grown up living with Marvin's family and considered Marvin to be a brother. As a child, Marvin protected Mateo. Mateo now feels he owes him something. He ignored Owen's admonition that if he keeps bailing Marvin out, he will never learn because he was determined to get Marvin the money. He was disregarded by Mateo. He began online sales of his Pokemon cards. Nancy discovered what he was doing, and he was ready to trade even his favorite card for this cousin. He was caught selling his cards by Nancy. He told her the narrative about what was going on with Marvin. She was sorry to see him set to part with his favorite card. He no longer needs to sell his collection because she made the decision to lend him the money he required to save his relative. Once Marvin gets to court, all he needs to do is reimburse Nancy. Mateo anticipated that would occur, but sadly it didn't. Marvin had just been free for 2 hours when he made the decision to violate the terms of his bail by taking a joyride in another expensive car. He was operating a Porsche at the time of the collision. Furthermore, this one was lethal. Marvin perished in the mishap. Now that he has left, Mateo feels responsible for the passing of his cousin. He couldn't believe he had trusted Marvin despite the fact that it was obvious he was troubled. Marvin has never learnt a lesson from adversity. He simply kept repeating the same action. Mateo only holds himself accountable since he now understands that Owen was correct. He shouldn't have kept supporting his cousin in this way. Marvin had desperately needed assistance. He didn't always relish getting into trouble, but he did. Marvin was once the right person, and Mateo used to be the one who was always in trouble. After Marvin's passing, Mateo drank. He started to dream. He experienced a psychedelic ride as his recollections and the present situation clashed. A trip that made him realize that he indeed owes Marvin money. He recalled how Marvin had assumed responsibility for him after he unintentionally burned down his middle school. Back then, Mateo was associated with a bad crew. He was getting into all kinds of difficulties, and since his cousin was an American citizen, he was held responsible. He was aware that if Mateo was arrested, he would be returned to Mexico, and he had to stop that from happening. When Mateo was 6 years old, his family left Mexico. Since he has no recollections of Mexico, Marvin prevented his deportation. Then Marvin logged into the system. He traveled a long and dark road before convincing himself that the world owed him something as compensation for his sacrifices. He began loaning other people's automobiles. If he wasn't caught, he would typically return them. Thus Mateo is now filled with regret. Mateo struggled to tell the rest of the family of Marvin's passing. Mateo was roused from his inebriated stupor. After receiving medical attention for his head injury, he realized he had to confess to his misdeeds and turn himself up. He wanted to admit to starting the fire all those years ago and tell the police so. Because of what he'd done, he wanted to ruin his entire career. Owen then informed him that he was making amends and doing so each day by reporting to work as a firefighter and saving lives. In the meantime, Judd had told Tommy the truth. Wyatt wanted to join AFD, he told her. He later informed Wyatt that he believed his father was too soft for the fire service because he had not wanted to assist his kid. Only Grace reminded him that he was Wyatt's father. It was his job to toughen up his son. Judd decided to just that when he found out that Wyatt saw the chief himself and he talked his way into getting a position at the academy. He also didn't use Judd's name to do it. Wyatt was now on his way to becoming a firefighter, and so Judd agreed to help him toughen up for the job.